At 80 years old, Pattie Boyd no longer hides behind the myth of being just a muse. For decades, she was the face behind some of the most famous love songs ever written, immortalized in George Harrison's Something and Eric Clapton's Layla. To the outside world, that seemed like the ultimate dream. To be loved so fiercely that two rock legends would battle over her in front of the world. But behind that dream was a reality so turbulent, it could have destroyed her completely. What most people don't realize is that her life wasn't just about glamour and romance, betrayal, obsession, humiliation, and survival. She wasn't simply a muse. She was a woman caught in the storm of two men's egos, addictions, and infidelities. And for the first time, she's revealed the shocking truth of what those years really cost her. This isn't the fairy tale story you think it is. It's the untold story of how one woman endured passion, chaos, and betrayal at the hands of two of rock's biggest icons, and how she finally found herself after decades in the shadows. Before the stage lights and the chaos of the 1960s, Pattie Boyd's story started in far less glamorous circumstances. Born Patricia Ann Boyd in 1944 in Somerset, England, her early years were marked by constant change. And the Royal Air Force took the family as far as Nairobi, Kenya. But by the time Pattie was just 8 years old, her parents' marriage had collapsed. That instability would shape her as the eldest of 4 children who often had to adapt quickly. By her teenage years in London, she was just another restless girl trying to figure out where she belonged. Her first job wasn't in front of the camera. It was washing hair at Elizabeth Arden's salon. But fate intervened when a photographer's assistant noticed her striking features. Before long, the girl from Somerset was gracing the covers of Vogue, Elle, and Vanity Fair. With her wide, expressive eyes and modern bohemian style, she became one of the defining faces of the swinging 60s. Designers named collections after her, and she set trends across London's fashion scene. But her destiny changed forever in 1964, when she landed a small role in the Beatles' film A Hard Day's Night. On that set, she met George Harrison, and with that meeting, her life entered a whirlwind she could never have imagined. The connection between Pattie Boyd and George Harrison was instant. Just 2 years after they met, in January 1966, they married, and to the world it seemed like the perfect love story. Harrison adored her, even immortalizing his feelings in songs like Something, which Frank Sinatra once called the greatest love song ever written. To fans, Pattie was the ultimate rock star wife. Beautiful, glamorous, and seemingly adored. But behind the music, cracks began to show almost immediately. Harrison's obsession with Indian spirituality drew him deeper into meditation and distant travels, while Pattie was left alone, feeling invisible in her own marriage. At his request, she gave up her modeling career to focus on being a wife, but instead of bringing them closer, it trapped her in a life where she felt unseen. And then came the betrayals. Harrison's wandering eye turned into blatant affairs, each one cutting deeper into Pattie's self-worth. The most humiliating came when she discovered that George had taken up with Maureen Starkey, Ringo Starr's wife. The betrayal was devastating. Imagine finding your husband with the wife of his bandmate in your own home, only for him to act like it didn't matter. That moment broke something inside her. But what Pattie didn't realize was that another storm was already forming. Because Eric Clapton, George's close friend, had been quietly obsessed with her for years. Eric Clapton had been circling Pattie Boyd since the mid-1960s, when they moved in the same elite circles of London's rock and fashion scene. By then, Clapton was already building his legend as one of the greatest guitarists alive. But his admiration for Pattie turned into something darker, a fixation. Despite his deep friendship with George Harrison, Clapton couldn't hide the fact that he was hopelessly in love with Pattie. His friends knew. George probably knew too. But what shocked Pattie most was when the obsession spilled out in ways she couldn't ignore. In 1969, she received an anonymous letter signed only with the letter E. It was filled with raw longing and desperation. If you want me, take me. I am yours. If you don't want me, please break the spell that binds me. Later, she realized it was Clapton who had written it. She was shaken to her core. Here was George's best friend, confessing in secret that he would give up everything, even his family and faith, just to be with her. That desperation eventually poured into his music. In 1970, Clapton released Layla, inspired by both an ancient Persian love story and his own torment over Pattie. The song was a raw, almost unbearable cry of passion. And it worked. Pattie admitted later that she couldn't resist the idea of inspiring that kind of art. The walls of loyalty she'd built around her marriage to George began to crumble. By the early 1970s, George Harrison and Pattie Boyd's marriage was already collapsing under the weight of infidelity and distance. But things exploded when Clapton decided he could no longer suffer in silence. In 1970, he confronted Harrison directly, admitting, "I'm in love with your wife." Imagine the scene. One of the world's most famous guitarists, face to face with another, confessing his love for the other man's wife. Harrison's response was strangely calm, even sarcastic, as though he knew he couldn't stop what was coming. The tension between them played out not just in private but in music itself. There were reports of a so-called guitar duel at Harrison's Friar Park estate, where he and Clapton battled out their rivalry through furious playing, letting their instruments speak the words they couldn't say. Pattie was at the center of it all, torn between loyalty to George and the undeniable devotion of Eric. By 1974, she couldn't deny the truth anymore. Her marriage to Harrison was over. She left him, ending her role as the Beatles' wife. But if she thought life with Clapton would be a fresh start, she was about to discover that his demons would drag her into an even darker chapter. When Pattie Boyd finally married Eric Clapton in 1979, it felt like destiny fulfilled. For years he had chased her, writing love letters, composing masterpieces, and openly declaring his feelings. Now, she was his. Even George Harrison attended the wedding, jokingly calling Clapton his husband, as though the bizarre triangle had ended in friendship. But the reality of their marriage was far from romantic. Clapton was still haunted by addictions. Heroin had nearly destroyed him in the early 70s, and once he beat that, alcoholism took its place. His drinking binges made him volatile, unpredictable, and sometimes cruel. Pattie, meanwhile, longed to build a family with him. They turned to IVF treatments, each one ending in heartbreak. She described the process as humiliating, an endless cycle of hope and devastation. While she endured that private pain, Clapton betrayed her in public ways. In 1985, she learned that he had fathered a child with studio manager Yvonne Kelly. Just a year later, another child was born to Italian actress Lori Del Santo. All while Pattie was still his wife. The cruelty of it broke her. Here she was, desperately trying to conceive, while her husband was fathering children elsewhere. By 1987, the marriage had collapsed under the weight of addiction, infidelity, and broken dreams. Their divorce was finalized in 1989, and Pattie was left with nothing but questions about who she really was after being defined by two of the most famous men in music. Walking away from Eric Clapton was more than the end of a marriage. It was the beginning of Pattie Boyd reclaiming her identity. For over 2 decades, she had been seen through the lens of someone else, first as George Harrison's wife, then as Eric Clapton's muse. But who was Pattie, really? She admitted that her self-worth had been shattered, worn down by constant betrayals, comparisons, and heartbreak. Therapy helped her untangle the pain, but healing also came through creativity. Photography, which had always been her private passion, became her outlet. She began documenting her world with a candid eye, capturing not just celebrities but her own journey of survival. Her exhibitions in London and abroad gained attention, and for the first time, she was recognized for her own art. Writing also gave her power back. In 2007, she released her memoir Wonderful Tonight, a raw and unflinching account of her life with Harrison and Clapton. Fans who once idealized her marriages were shocked to learn the truth. The affairs, the loneliness, the betrayals. But the book was more than an exposé. It was Pattie finally telling her own story on her own terms. By the time she entered her 70s, she was no longer just a muse. She was an artist, a survivor, and a woman who had found her own voice. Today, at 80 years old, Pattie Boyd speaks with the clarity of someone who has lived through storms few could imagine. She no longer romanticizes her past as the muse of rock legends. Instead, she tells the truth. That life with Eric Clapton was not the grand love story fans believed, but a cycle of addiction, betrayal, and pain. She has openly described the heartbreak of trying and failing to have children, only to discover her husband secretly fathering them elsewhere. She's admitted how humiliating it was to feel invisible in her marriage to George Harrison, even while he wrote timeless love songs about her. Yet she refuses to let those years define her as a victim. Through her memoirs, photography, and interviews, Pattie has reclaimed her story. In 2015, she married property developer Rod Weston in a quiet ceremony, a relationship built not on fame or obsession but on peace and mutual respect. Her legacy today is not just that of a muse who inspired some of the greatest love songs ever written. It's the legacy of a survivor who endured betrayal, humiliation, and heartbreak, and came out the other side with her voice intact. The question is, do you see Pattie Boyd as someone unfairly treated by the men who claim to love her, or as someone who simply got caught in the chaos of fame and ego? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell, so you won't miss the next story we uncover.